Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider. It's that time of week again where we all get together, we hold hands and talk Bengals. Well, maybe we don't hold hands, but we hang out in one form or another, and we talk about the Bengals. We update you on things about the Bengals, and we give you our perspective on things that are happening with the team. And obviously, it's been a very interesting offseason up to this point, and we are at the point of the offseason where it's ramping up and going into the critical days, the days of training camp, cut down days, all that kind of stuff. Last week, we talked about some of the rule changes, which include cut down days. This week, we threw the listeners a little bit of a curveball here, Connor. We thought we would have Scott Schulze with us this week, and the three of us would get together and talk about the schedule, give a prediction, all of that, now that rookies are in the fold. Unfortunately, Scott had something that came up last minute, and he could not join us. So because that's a topic that I think would be interesting for all three of us when we're available to talk about, we're going to table that for probably another week or so, but we will get to the schedule prediction. What we are going to do today, we've already gotten some listener questions, so again, send those our way via Cincy Jungle in the comment thread that's live, via YouTube in the live chat there. We're on Twitter at Bengals OBI, so you can send them there as well. We'll be answering a few of those at the end of the show. But what we will be doing is talking about a lot of the recent happenings with Bengals OTAs, a lot of recent comments by Bengals stars, Bengals coaches, guys who have been impressing, and just kind of going through a myriad of topics that way. And we'll table the schedule prediction for another week or so. I hope all of you who are tuning in had a great Memorial Day weekend, whether you worked or not. And my sidekick here, Connor Howe, actually had to work on his Memorial Day, I believe, right, buddy?
Yeah.
But did you have
It's all right.
did you have a good weekend nonetheless?
It was a good weekend. It was a good weekend. Good food.
Good, good.
Always
Okay.
good food.
Yeah, usually Memorial Day weekend is when a lot of people fire up the barbecues and get everything going. So I hope everybody had a safe and fun Memorial Day, and thank you to all of the veterans, past, present, and future, who have served, are serving, or will serve, as that's obviously the true meaning of Memorial Day. So if we have veterans, spouses of veterans, dependents of veterans, that sort of thing, listening to this program, we give you our thumbs up, our salute that probably isn't totally correct, but we give you our thanks and our kudos for serving this country. Connor, let's get it started. OTAs have kicked off. There's been a lot of interesting things that have gone on, and knock on wood, one of the things that has not happened has been the injury bug. And granted, this is kind of light workouts, drills. I mean, yeah, they run some plays and things like that, but this isn't a lot of contact. So luckily the Bengals have largely avoided that. And if that changes, do not come yelling at Connor or I for bringing it up. But one thing that's interesting is Andre Smith, the offensive tackle, offensive guard, was missing from OTAs earlier, and Trey Hopkins filled in, and he was the starting guard in drills on the right side there. A lot of people like Trey Hopkins since he joined the Bengals as an undrafted free agent. He flashed well in preseason and things of that nature, but he has not been able to stay healthy. He's been bounced on and off the active roster. Pretty interesting stuff, but it's also a bit concerning given the fact that Smith was brought in as a Band-Aid for Kevin Zeitler leaving, and now that one of their outside gets, quote unquote, outside gets in free agency is not suiting up. Your thoughts on the whole Hopkins-Smith situation, Connor?
I think it's interesting. You look at the Bengals roster, and obviously Smith is supposed to start at right guard. I mean, that's why the Bengals signed him for the contract they signed him for. But I think it's worth mentioning that Trey Hopkins started, or Jim Osarski initially tweeted out that Trey Hopkins was getting, the first team snaps when Andre Smith was out, but that eventually he clarified and said that the people were kind of rotating in and out. To me, I think the biggest indicator of all of this is that TJ Johnson wasn't ahead of Trey Hopkins. I mean, Christian Westerman, you can understand. It's only his second year in the system. Trey Hopkins has been in Cincinnati since 2014. But TJ Johnson's been there since 2013. He started at, I believe, left guard in place of, I'm pretty sure, Clint Bowling. I think it was against the Texans, or maybe it was week 17, maybe it was both. And so you thought, I think the biggest indicator of all of this is the Bengals have three centers on the roster in Russell Bodine, TJ Johnson, and JJ Dielman. But TJ Johnson, at least as a backup guard, is below Trey Hopkins on the depth chart, which is kind of telling to me because Westerman, who knows? Maybe they think I don't know what the Bengals' plan is with him, and I think that him being a supposed like steal in the draft when really in all reality he's still a fifth round pick, and maybe draft Twitter liked him or whatever, but maybe it makes sense why the Bengals didn't have or wait until the fifth round to pick him. I don't know. I just think that it's interesting the Bengals have three centers on the roster. They're probably going to carry three centers on the team this year, which is really interesting, especially when you consider because like who's going to like. I think the guard position is the one of the most interesting positions on the roster because you're probably going to carry three centers. Your offensive linemen are the Bengals going to carry with so many talented players, or at least we believe are talented players on the team. You have like receivers, corners, linebackers, safeties. Like every position it seems like could have like more players than usual. And then they carried Jeff Driscoll on the roster all year last year as a backup quarterback. What is going to happen with this team? And so, yeah, I think that. Like the fact that Trey Hopkins was getting like first team snaps at right guard could just be like it just goes to show how deep this roster really is. And I there's critics who are going to say the Bengals offensive line problems are like either going to make or break this team, which who knows, maybe they're right on that. But this is a deep team at almost every position.
The thing that I wonder about, and I don't want to reiterate all the things that you said, and a lot of validity in what you said there, Connor. This coaching staff, particularly Marvin Lewis and Paul Alexander, really favor the veterans, and it's just interesting to me. They seem to like Christian Westerman. He's taking a backseat to Trey Hopkins, a guy who was an undrafted free agent who has been there a little longer. I mean, is this more, again, that annoying preference for a veteran that may or may not have more upside or more skill set than a guy like Westerman or maybe even TJ Johnson? I mean, some of these guys that are sitting on the roster, again, I think a lot of people like Hopkins. They like what they've seen, but he hasn't been healthy and he hasn't been on the active roster regularly. So do you think this is still that veteran preference type of thing, or is it something else?
Who knows? It could be. That's definitely within the realm of possibility, knowing the Bengals. But I think you kind of. I think the point of Cincinnati fans, at least in my experience, seem to really overvalue a player based on where draft analysts believed he would fall in the draft. You look at Andrew Billings, and really, we know nothing about him. He's a guy who a lot of people thought could go as high as the first round in the draft, but ended up falling to round 4. And sure, draft Twitter loved him. But like, what do we know about him other than the only thing we know about him as an NFL player is that he missed his rookie season due to injury. And now, as good as we thought he was going to be last year, he's probably not even going to he's coming back from injury. So yet people are excited as Andrew Billings as a potential upgrade over Domata Peko, which whether you believe Peko was a great player or a bad player or whatever, he still had 11 years worth of experience, was a starter for a very long time, and he had his ups and downs, a lot of downs, but the fact that we as fans just are so quick to rush into the thinking that a guy like Andrew Billings or Christian Westerman, or just because a guy was drafted, because it really, when you think about it, Billings and Westerman weren't even drafted that high. They were kind of like they're mid-round picks, and draft Twitter loved them, and they thought that maybe they could be high round picks, but in all reality, I mean, there's a reason why teams pass on it. I don't know why it is. I don't know what team's reasoning was for picking them where they were picked, but at the end of the day, they're mid-round picks. And at Hopkins, he's a guy who's really stuck around through it all, and so I think it's kind of impressive. I mean, he was on the practice squad for a long time. Like I said, he's been in Cincinnati. This is his 14, 15. So it's his fourth season with the Bengals. And guys like that usually don't stick around. You have like I just saw Orson Charles signed a contract in Kansas City, but he's been bouncing around. Jason DeManch has been bouncing around. Sure, guys sometimes end up back in Cincinnati, but you look at the team and it's hard for guys to hang around on the roster on the fringe for so long. Like guys like Sean Porter eventually fall off. Guys like those types of players. And sure, there's exceptions like with Trey Hopkins, like with P. Dawson, like with some others. But I think I mean, I'm rooting for the guy. I'm rooting for everyone, obviously. I mean, it's the Bengals. You hope they win. But I don't know. Personally, I think you look at Trey Hopkins and you see a guy who clearly is working hard, somewhat impressing coaches, and at the end of the day, hopefully deserves a shot at the roster. But at this time of the season, I think it's just so early that it's hard to make these assumptions or implications about trying to read into every single snap as though it's going to have really intense implications. But I think that's just what we tend to do as fans, since there's really nothing else to talk about.
Right. And, there is the overreaction aspect. And, again, these are OTAs. This isn't, mandatory training camp practices, that sort of thing. Andre Smith has the concerning thing for me, Connor, is Andre Smith missing time, just because he's been a guy who has seemingly always missed time because of injury, whether they're big injuries, small injuries, that sort of thing. And this is, yes, the Bengals relied on him heavily as a right tackle. Do you like the pun there? Andre Smith heavily. The
that was mean. Low hanging fruit.
Yeah, I know. I had to grab that opportunity there. But the team has relied on him heavily at right tackle, but they also always had guys waiting in the wings, whether it was an able tackle or swing guy that they could kick in there to fill in for him. Well, this year he's playing guard, and that is now a huge vacancy now that Zeitler's gone, and seeing him injured is a little bit concerning to me, but it is what it is. And, it's concerning, especially because of the issues on the offensive line. There's the talk of what's good is it's not really so much an injury. The talk was that it was bronchitis and he was ill, and that's why he wasn't able to participate in early session OTAs. But it's Andre Smith. And Andre Smith, while he's been a productive player when he's been on the field, unfortunately, he's missed a significant time on the field, which has kind of been a little bit of a MO for the Bengals and their high first-round picks in recent years. One other thing, let's spin it to the positive here. Aside from, and Scott and I talked about this last week, and George Aloka, we'll talk about him more too in just a minute. But George Aloka on Twitter a couple of weeks back noted that some fan asked him about how the Bengals rookies were looking, and he said, you didn't hear this from me, and it's just in shorts, but we drafted a lot of ballers, meaning like a lot of good players on this team, which was good to hear. And obviously there's some player speak and whatnot that's involved in that. But one of the guys who has recently risen to the top in terms of this year's rookie class, and it might be a surprise to some, it's probably not to others, is Carl Lawson, the outside linebacker / defensive end Paul Gunther was raving about him recently, Connor. Vontaze Burfict was recently raving about him. Kevin Minter, who was just added to this team in free agency, was raving about him. So it sounds like the Bengals have a guy who obviously he can rush the passer, and all three of those people I mentioned said that he knows how to get after the passer. I almost hesitate to say who Burfict compared him to, but I'll say it. He sees a little bit of a Von Miller type of player there, but obviously this is a guy, yes, he has experience a little bit in a 4-3 type of hybrid defense at Auburn. Yes, he has vast experience coming off of the edge. I worry a little bit about that transition, but apparently Paul Gunther said that he's pleased with the transition. Do you have the highest? I don't want to say the highest hopes, but might Lawson, because of the vacancy in the outside linebacker spot, might he be the guy who gets the most snaps of this year's rookies early on, Connor?
On defense? Or just in general?
Or either way, yeah.
It really could be. I mean, I personally think Jordan Willis could. I don't think Joe Mixon and John Ross are going to get as many snaps as people think they will, but I think it's going to be either Willis or Loss. Maybe the two negate each other out. It's really hard to tell. I think the Bengals drafted a lot of guys that a lot of people like. That doesn't necessarily mean they're better than other players, but I mean, you look at Carl Lawson and people thought he could have been as good as a first-round pick. 35 reps on the bench press is just ridiculous. And he ran a really good 20-yard shuttle. He's a guy who it's still kind of unclear where he's going to play on defense. Coaches really haven't seemed to be very vocal about what their strategy is for using him, which to a lot of fans has been concerning. But I think the defense against that would be if he's a good player. Von Miller or Vontaze comparing him to Von Miller. I mean, if Carl Lawson was Von Miller, then he would be able to rush the passer or sit back in coverage. I mean, if he's the player that Pro Football Focus thought when they called him a first round pick, you aren't going to blame the Bengals for putting him in. I mean, if he's a good player, he's going to make plays. So, and obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean the Bengals could potentially misuse him. But ultimately, if he's a great player, I mean, J.J. Watt is the best defender in the league, and he's a guy who plays pretty much any position on the D-line because he's just a great player. But you look at Lawson, he had, 9.5 sacks last year, 14 tackles for loss, really nice numbers, and he was a pretty athletic guy at the Combine. So people obviously have high hopes for him. At this point, it really just seems kind of like off-season talk, and I don't want to say I'll believe when I see it because it just sounds cliche, but at this point, it's just encouraging to have coaches and teammates who are accepting their teammates, because that's really all you can ask for with guys. It's just, we hear so much about the Bengals locker room culture, but as far as I know, these coaches and teammates are excited to have these players in the building. So that's all you can really ask for.
Right. And you got to love the fact that Steelers fans, or those who cover the Steelers, are keeping an eye on Jordan Willis and Carl Lawson. What I mean by that, there is a network of sites, they're called, it's like NFL Wire sites, Steelers Wire, that sort of thing. And one of the head people at Steelers Wire and NFL Wire, which is, I believe, through USA Today, who Cincy Jungle and SB Nation also has ties to as well. But old SB Nation friend Neil Coulon kind of is one of the head people there. But one of their writers from Steelers Wire, I noticed, had written something about talking about Lawson impressing at OTAs, talking about Willis impressing at OTAs, and these were two guys that the Steelers had on their radar, and or a lot of fans had on the Steelers' radar because of their pass rush ability. And obviously, that is something that Pittsburgh thrives on, especially from those outside linebacker positions. The list goes on, and some of them have been later picks. Some of them have been undrafted guys like James Harrison. And so maybe, the Lawson's not the big, tall, huge wingspan type of guy that Carlos Dunlap, Michael Johnson is, but he's got savviness in getting to the passer. He's got very good strength for that compact frame. It's just about him staying healthy and and being comfortable in his somewhat new role with the Bengals. So hopefully this momentum continues. And if you have not seen what I'm talking about, it is on Bengals.com. It is on ESPN.com. I will also be having a post on this tomorrow, I believe, on Cincy Jungle. Basically, defensive coordinator Paul Gunther says, I think he's going to be a damn good player. And he said he's smart, a real smart guy, picks it up, studies. He's always up watching tape. He's going to be good. We know he can go forward, dropping into coverage. He's going to have to work on it. Down the road, you can do a whole bunch of things with him. Once he understands the schematics of the defense, it's a whole new chess piece for us. And for those who love Vontaze Burfict, and it's many of us, he asked who Carl Lawson reminds him of, and he said, quote, the dude in the movie The Longest Yard who says, "You broke-ed my nose," if you remember that movie. Take that for what you will, but strength, speed, and savviness in getting to the passer is what Lawson's been showing, and that has been very good to see and very good to hear. John Ross, obviously, and Joe Mixon have been getting the bulk of the attention because they're 2 top picks, because they're skilled positions and high-profile guys. But as we mentioned, and you mentioned, Connor, it might seem that the mid-round guys, Jordan Willis and Carl Lawson, might end up, I don't want to say being the best players of this entire class, but maybe the best value in terms of what they'll bring and where the team got them. Both seemed like fringe first-round guys, second-round talents that the team got in the 3rd and 4th round, respectively. So good stuff from Carl Lawson and a lot of other guys this week. I'm really interested to see what you have to say about this one, Connor. And I mentioned George Iloka earlier. George Iloka has been a guy who has been productive for the Bengals, signed a pretty nice contract. What was that, the 2016 offseason? And he's been a productive guy for him. Yes, he's missed a handful of games from injury, but he's a very athletic guy, a very, very good all-around safety for the Bengals. I think he missed his usual counterpart at the beginning of the season in Reggie Nelson last year, but he and Sean Williams ended up playing pretty well down the stretch. He's also a bit outspoken and not to the way of diva wide receivers and whatnot, but again, this is on Cincy Jungle as well. He was speaking on the radio, and it's about the perception, the national media perception of the Bengals, other franchises, potential other players, their view of the franchise. And it's a lot. It has to do, unfortunately, a lot with character concerns and, the NFL bad boys coming back again in Cincinnati. I want to get your thoughts on some of these comments Iloka made, Connor. He said, honestly, it doesn't make or break me, Iloka said when asked if he cared about how the Bengals are viewed by outsiders. My attitude has kind of changed this offseason. Seeing people tee off on our team as a whole because of incidents here and there and labeling all of us and things like that. So at the end of the day, and this is again in a local quote, so at the end of the day, my attitude changed to it's us and, excuse my language, but F everyone else. It don't matter what they think come Sunday. It don't matter what we think. It just matters what we do on Sundays. So this could be viewed as such a simple thing to dissect and such a complex thing to dissect. If you follow George Iloka on Twitter, he's always seemed to have Adam Jones's back this offseason through the situation that has gone on with Pac-Man. To me, I love it. Not necessarily the choice of words, I guess, that I would use, but I love the attitude, and it's like, let us do our thing. And yes, the Bengals haven't gained haven't done a lot to gain a lot of fan trust and outside media trust because they've choked in big games and they haven't played well, but they've built a winning team over the past half decade plus at a minimum. And that's kind of where Aloka's coming from. Do you agree, Connor?
Oh, I love Iloka. I think it's so like the Bengals have a lot of really like. I wish these guys talk to the media more because they're such like they're just fascinating people. I love Iloka. I love Tez. I love Jeremy Hill. All these guys are just even like Drake Kirkpatrick. All these guys, whenever they speak, they just don't like. They really legitimately don't care what all these people have to say, and these Bengals players just get so much crap year in and year out about. And it's not really their fault, but it's just the media always has to. I'm saying like it's not the media's fault. The media's job is to ask them about that stuff, but they get asked about the whole playoff losses thing every single year. Some fans might say rightfully so, but it gets so old. And Iloka is just such an entertaining guy. He's a great follow on Twitter. Really fun guy to follow on pretty much any form of social media, and he just speaks the truth. And he has one of these types of quotes every single year, but it really just goes to show the media just continually asking about the Bengals podcast. But yeah, you gotta love Iloka because they're really these. If these guys were thinking about anyone else, what does that say about these guys? I mean, I don't know. I like what he has to say. You have to have your teammates back. I mean, I guess you don't technically have to, and there are people in the NFL who don't necessarily have everyone's back. You know, IK Anapali, who punched Geno Smith in the jaw, comes to mind. But I don't know. I really like it, and he's such an articulate guy, and seems like a cool guy. I know he gave Rebecca at Cincy Jungle an interview last year. I'm pretty sure he might have given another one before, too. Just seems like a cool guy, and yeah, I mean, he's a really likable dude, and he's really a super solid player, really perennially underrated. He's one of the most impactful coverage safeties in the entire NFL, and no one really seems to notice him because if you watch, the game on broadcast, he literally doesn't show up on tape because just the way the Bengals deploy their safeties in those two deep coverages, he's almost never on the camera unless a quarterback overthrows a pass or throws into his coverage, which is not very often. So I love Iloka. I love what he had to say. You have to have that chip on the shoulder, and it's good that he's using the Bengals' shortcomings as a chip on his shoulder rather than a crutch that he has to rely on or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, and I've been on this program and probably some other things I've written for Cincy Jungles, not really defending Adam Jones and not been in his corner just because of his past and this specific situation and what happened in the 2016 season and a variety of factors. I don't want to go ad nauseum with the thing, but it is nice to see a guy like Iloka have his players back, like you said. And I don't want to say that, Iloka agrees with Jones's actions or whatever, because he probably doesn't, but it's also, I mean, he's kind of taking the mindset of this guy's here, he's going to be here. And if he, unless something weird happens, this is a guy that's probably going to start. I'm going to have to work with him as I've done over the past handful of years as a starting defensive back. This is a guy that I have to support. And if people have bad things to say about Adam Jones, about Joe Mixon, they can say that, they can have those opinions. But as he said, what we care about, meaning we, the Bengals, care about is what happens on Sunday. And as you and I know, Connor, winning cures a lot of these types of situations. And, Joe Mixon, all of a sudden, he stays clean off the field as a rookie, runs for 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. Adam Jones is doing things as a punt returner again and has 4 interceptions. The Bengals go to the playoffs. Maybe the bad boy thing disappears.
You're gonna get like one hate column from Mike Freeman, who's like, "Oh, the Bengals like
Well, of
made the
course.
playoffs, but they shouldn't be allowed to make the playoffs because." But like, yeah, I mean, fans aren't going to be complaining if Adam Jones was a punt returner last year. I think a lot of people wouldn't have complained about him because his play as a cornerback really didn't change a whole lot. It was the fact that he really wasn't doing much in the punt return game, and his potential as a punt returner was just so good. So yeah, I think winning, like you said, winning cures everything, man.
And that is the only promotion of Mike Freeman that you will probably hear on this program.
Oh, please! I hope we know. That's not. I hope that's not a promotion.
It's not even a promotion. It's the only, probably one of the only mentions, unless once we start doing the Haters of the Week segment again, he will probably be a part of that. But that is one of the few times, at least you will hear Connor and I mention Mike Freeman on this program for a variety of reasons. Before we get to some fan questions, Connor. And again, I want to remind folks, if you want to send those questions in, where you can join our live YouTube chat, send them there. We're on Twitter at Bengals OBI, the Cincy Jungle live comment thread. We're monitoring those through the live broadcast of the program. So send them there. If you're unable to join the live broadcast, we're sorry that you can't, but you can catch all of our content on SoundCloud for the audio links, YouTube for video and audio. Cincy Jungle, which is part of the SB Nation Network, carries all of our posts and all of our content as well. And then we promote things through Twitter, email, all that stuff. But also we're on iTunes. Check us out. Leave us a rating. We appreciate that. Let us know what you'd like to also hear from us in terms of segments, that sort of thing. We'd love to get some feedback there, especially in some of these, I don't want to say slower months, but, we try and grab for content and whatnot. So if you have some fan questions, let us know. We'd like to hear from you. One more guy who's made some interesting comments is AJ Green. And obviously AJ Green is one of, if not the most talented player on the Bengals roster. There's debate there, but there's no doubting he's one of their probably two best players on this team. There's a couple of things, and I guess I'll start with this, with you, Connor. AJ Green said recently he wants to play another 7 years, which would put him, I believe, with this year at the 14-year mark, 13, 14-year mark, in terms of if that's when he wants to retire. And the good news is, if that's how long he wants to play, the Bengals have him under contract for most of that. And he continues to be, at least to this point, continues to be a Hall of Fame caliber wide receiver. Last year, had he not gotten hurt and injured his hamstring, even though the team struggled, he was having one of his best statistical seasons and was doing things with minimal help throughout the year. And who knows if AJ Green stays healthy in that Buffalo game, he's healthy for the Ravens game after that, who he continually dominates. Those are games that are lost by one possession. All of a sudden, the team may be in a wild card type of situation just by having AJ Green there. Regardless, he not only said that, but he also said he made some interesting comments about the Bengals not rushing John Ross on the field, which may or may not upset some people. Connor, Green said recently, with John Ross, we're not going to rush him in. We've got guys that can play with Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd, so that's one thing. He's not going to have to be pressured to play right away. We've got a great receiving core, so we're going to give him some of his plays and let him work himself in. Is this surprising to you to hear this? Number one, obviously AJ Green's not a coach, so Ken Zampese, Marvin Lewis would probably have, I would hope, would have more of a say in who's playing and who's not than AJ Green, even though he's a star receiver. But does this surprise you, Connor, that the idea of, hey, top 10 pick, speedy wide receiver, regardless, the stud wide receiver on this team is still saying Brandon LaFell, Tyler Boyd, those are our guys at least early on. Ross, maybe wait your turn.
I mean, I think it probably would surprise the majority of fans, but with me, it doesn't really come as a surprise. I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the draft, is just that so many fans overrate these guys. Well, not necessarily overrate. I mean, people just get very high on players, and that doesn't, I mean, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean they're overrating them, because we really don't know who John Ross is at this point. But we've seen him play in college. He's a great player in college, and he was, whether or not he's worth a top 10 pick aside, he is going to, from what we saw in college, it's safe to assume, okay, he's going to be a good player. And who knows, maybe we're wrong, maybe we're right. But the Bengals, I mean, they drafted Ross as kind of a best player available type of thing. They really didn't need to draft a receiver in the top 10. They had A.J. Green, Brandon LaFell, Tyler Boyd, Cody Core. I mean, and that's just those four, but they also had a couple of guys. Even the guys who have been on the back end of their roster, James Wright gets signed by the Browns. Mario Alford, I believe, ended up in Cleveland or somewhere. Maybe he didn't. But the Bengals have had a pretty deep receiving core, even though a lot of fans haven't believed they have. And Ross, you definitely, especially with his injury concerns, there's really no harm in easing him along. I mean, I guess if you're one of those fans who really believes that John Ross is going to make or break this team this year, then that would make sense to bring him on right away. But the Bengals passing offense is very much a timing based offense. And so to have a guy like LaFell there as everyone else gets acclimated to the offense, need to progress and develop in the slot. It really doesn't hurt. I mean, John Ross would be a great situational piece to come in and make some plays early on. And just because he's not taking every snap, that doesn't mean that he's not gonna be an impactful player. You look at the Bengals, and if they're running the ball, at least just looking at him as, I mean, I'll be the first to admit I haven't seen 20 hours worth of John Ross tape, but you probably don't want Jeremy Hill running out of I formation with John Ross out wide. That just doesn't really seem like an ideal situation, or Joe Mixon for that matter. It really doesn't matter who the back is. So to have Ross just come in and kind of play that what Cody Core did last year, but maybe to a greater extent, maybe even a Tyler Boyd type of role in terms of snaps, not in terms of where they played on the field. I mean, I don't know. Some fans are going to say that he got drafted top 10. You have to play him right away. But, I think at the end of the day, the Bengals, they've earned my trust. Maybe they haven't earned everyone else's trust. And I think that Green knows what the coaches are thinking. I mean, he's at that level at this point in his career. So if the Bengals decide to make Ross a rotational player, I'm all for it, as long as they don't just sit him the whole year for no reason.
Right, and that's where I was going with it. It's one thing to say he's got to learn the system, and he's got to learn a diverse route tree potentially. And by the way, this isn't a guy, we've talked about this. This isn't a Brashad Perriman. This isn't a guy that doesn't know how to run routes. This is not just a track sprinter who happens to play football. This is a wide receiver with track sprinter speed. He can stretch the field. He can do a lot of different things. I also think A.J. Green really likes Brandon LaFell in terms of personally and professionally. I think they have a good rapport, and he's sticking up for LaFell. But I also think that early on, I'm not opposed to Ross, maybe being a number 4 option, if you want to call it that, especially as he kind of gets his feet wet. He's also had some injuries and things of that nature, so you got to be a little careful there. But you do want your best players on the field at all times. Maybe it's a thing where we have specific designs for this guy as a rookie. There's 5 to 10 plays that 5 to 10 routes we want to consistently see him run. And maybe 2 or 3 of those 10 routes are simply to get attention off of other guys, Tyler Eifert, AJ Green. Maybe it's just the game plan is he's out there, and though maybe Ross being out there, though he's not getting a catch, though he's not scoring a touchdown, it allows another guy to do so. And That has to be part of that had to be part of the plan when the Bengals were selecting John Ross at number 9 overall. And I'm excited for the kid. I think he's going to be a good player should he stay healthy. I do think the Bengals should not, as you said, be afraid to use him just because he's a rookie. He's, maybe nursing some injury things. They need to use him, but they also need to use him wisely. And I think he's a guy that can be a valuable weapon. And maybe he's the guy that takes over that number 2 spot officially later this season, maybe next season, maybe after Brandon LaFell's contract expires. I believe it's a 2-year deal this time. So, maybe it's a couple of years before Ross takes over. Your thoughts, Connor?
Well, yeah, and you look at like the way the Bengals receivers last year. I mean, because people forget the Bengals receiving core last year. AJ Green is really the only guy who had been there for more than for even a season, let alone of the guys who got the snaps. Brandon LaFell, brand new to the system. Tyler Boyd, brand new to the system. Cody Core, brand new to the system. I don't even remember who else was behind them at that point, but it doesn't matter because they weren't on the field. You look at Brandon LaFell, and people are going to say that his numbers are inflated because he was the number 1 guy. Regardless of what all of that stuff, he looked a lot better as a player as the season progressed. He as the season went on, he emerged more as a playmaker. As the season progressed, Tyler Boyd progressed more as a playmaker. As the season progressed, Cody Core progressed.
Cody Core,
even with CJ Uzomah, when Tyler Eifert was out, it took a few weeks for him to get going, but he made some plays as the season progressed, whether or not Eifert was even in. I mean, he came in as a rotational player behind Eifert and made some plays down the stretch. So you look at the Bengals players, and I think it's easy for fans to get caught up and wrapped up in the fact that he's this flashy new. We have to play him as much as we can because it's you want your best players on the field, and he was a first-round pick. So what's the point in taking a guy in the first round if you don't play him 874 snaps his first year, or whatever that is? But I think people want to look at the team and run it like a Madden franchise. Assume no one's ever going to get hurt. Run these guys into the ground, and play these you want your 90 overall guy that's at every single position, because you're treating it like a computer system rather than, okay, well, these are actual people, and quarterback receiver chemistry, continuity, connection type of thing is really a tangible thing in the NFL, and players and coaches really value that. And as we've seen with Bengals receivers, things get good as the season progresses. I mean, AJ Green, even early in his rookie season, had some battles, but he really emerged as a player down the stretch. And I mean, I have high expectations for John Ross, but just because he doesn't start off the season as the number 2 opposite AJ Green, that doesn't mean that his rookie season's a failure, that Marvin Lewis is, preferring vets over rookies. And even if that is the case, that it might not necessarily apply in this circumstance. So I trust what the Bengals are doing, because you look at the receiver success under James Urban, and it's been astronomical. And with guys like Brandon LaFell, who at the time of his signing, fans were so skeptical about, and then here he is almost putting up 1,000 yards last year.
I agree with you. And the user in the YouTube chat, I believe it's Diesel44. There's 2 3s in there, so I'm kind of putting it together here, but. Makes a good point. I really want Cody Core and Josh Malone to get some plays. I think if they get taught and progress correctly, they could be solid NFL wide receivers. I really liked the Malone pick this year. I think he might be a poor man's Chris Henry. Size, speed, that sort of thing. And it's the same mold as Cody Core. And Cody Core, unfortunately, even though he had some nice plays last year, unfortunately, injuries and things of that nature, while it pressed him into being used, there wasn't so much of there was the one long ball against the Eagles that he caught, which was a great play. But they didn't get to use that a ton because of so many injuries and deficiencies on offense. They did more, I specifically remember the Houston game, a lot of slants, a lot of screens and things like that with him, which, yes, he can catch and he can run after the catch, of course, but I don't know if that was his true strength. It's more of getting down the field, working the sidelines, that sort of thing. And unfortunately, the Bengals were just kind of pressed into using him in a way that, while it was effective and he did okay in that role later on, it was, maybe not what they had initially envisioned for a guy like that. And it's going to be tough this year. We've talked about it a bunch. It's going to be tough this year to see how the Bengals sort out. And I don't envy that discussion. It's going to be tough to see how the Bengals sort out the wide receiver group because there's so much talent there, both from the roster last year and the new guys coming in this year. Let's get to some fan questions, Connor. What do you think? Sound good?
Yep.
Okay. We got an email, and again, you can email us, theobinsider@gmail.com. I am available, bengalanthony@gmail.com. Connor's available on Twitter at is it still at Howe NFL, Connor?
No, it's YB Connor, but I don't even know. I might delete my Twitter. Twitter has been annoying.
Twitter.
You can ask me questions. Ask me questions. Ask me questions.
Wait a minute. You're gonna delete your Twitter after you've become, I don't want to say a troll.
I know I am a troll, but it's, I mean, I don't know, man.
You've been a guy who stokes the fire a little bit.
Oh, I love to stir the pot, but I mean, I don't know, man. Twitter, it's people. That's I like to joke around, and I don't know. I probably won't delete my Twitter, but I don't know. Send me questions. That would definitely, send me questions at YB Connor. I mean, that would definitely make my experience on Twitter a little better.
You don't like the Twitter tough guy crew? You don't like Twitter tough guys?
It's not the tough guys. It's just the people who are obsessed with the draft and want to treat everyone like they're a chess piece and not like a person. I don't know. I like people who have stories, and so far it's just been a lot of film and political outrage over the past a long time. So I think once football season starts, Twitter will become a little more bearable again.
If the Bengals win. If they don't, then
I like it when they lose. I love when people when people lose. I just like going on rants. So I mean, either way, I'll have fun. not everyone else is probably not fun, but I
right. So we got an email, Connor, from John Telly. Great email, love it, because it strokes my ego a bit, but other than that, it's very complimentary. And John, thanks for emailing. He writes, Anthony, I love OBI, but I work Wednesday evenings, which is when we record, so I can never watch it live. However, my wife and I look forward to watching the podcast every week. I'm sorry, John, and to Mrs. Telly, that you have to see this ugly mug every week, but we try and bring you good content regardless. I wanted to submit a question, and I'd love to hear you guys talk about it. I, along with a lot of fans, are worried about the offensive line. Is it still possible that we pick up a free agent after other teams start cutting their roster? And if we do, is O-line a position group that a player can join at the last minute and be able to play effectively without knowing the offense? Also, can you mention any names of possible free agents that the Bengals should be looking at? Well, I'm going to start and definitely want to get your thoughts. This is a great question. I think it's a great question, and thanks to John. And unfortunately, I don't know Mrs. Telly's first name, but Mr. and Mrs. Telly, thank you for tuning into the program. Thank you for submitting the question as well. I'm going to start with the last question, at least for me. Free agent names the Bengals should be looking at. Well, I'm going to circle back around with that to the fact of picking up a free agent. Yes, there are guys out there right now that you could currently use. If the Bengals, to me, were to add someone, it's going to be after cuts. It's going to be after the final cuts. And if you tune into the episode last week, we talked about rule changes. And one of the rule changes is basically there's not going to be set cut down days anymore. There's not going to be, multiple cuts. It's basically 90 to 53 right before the regular season starts. So that both makes things, it makes players desirable to a lot of other teams. And it also muddies the water for a lot of teams because teams hold on to some of these guys. Um, I do agree with John that offensive line, and I think Greg and others in the YouTube chat noted earlier tonight that the offensive line is the biggest question mark on this team, and likely the team getting back to the playoffs hinges on that group. Um, I think there is a possibility, especially if there's an injury, if that the team could pick up a free agent. Who that might be, I think that depends on who's out there, who's cut, who the team finds valuable. I will say, to the question John posed, at least for me, and Connor, I'm going to get to your thoughts on all of this in a minute. The, can a player join at the last minute and be able to play effectively? The only way they could do that is if they are guys that are familiar with the system, know what Paul Alexander wants to do, and or have versatility in terms of playing multiple spots. I think that's going to be key for anybody that the Bengals bring in terms of free agents and an offensive lineman. They have to be versatile, and they have to be affordable. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Connor, I think if a team signs a guy after week 2, it does something to it doesn't affect the cap, or there's certain salary obligations.
I don't know anything about cap stuff. Yeah, I don't know cap stuff.
All right, okay. I think if a team signs if a team signs a guy after week 2 in the regular season, they're not on the hook for certain salary obligations and things of that nature. But great question from John. Your thoughts, Connor?
Sorry. I think I really like the question. It's a really in-depth question here. I think you brought up a really good point with the whole the direct cut from 90 to 53. I never really considered that before today, even though I've kind of known that's been the new rule, and that's going to change a lot. I think a lot of teams have been kind of signing guys from, it also eliminates kind of a whole news day for us, which I don't know, that might be a good or a bad thing, but there used to be the 75-man cut day where that was okay. Well, who were the best guys that got cut from the 90-man roster to the 75-man roster? And usually, none of these guys that get cut go on to be these superstars. But sometimes you get those interesting names where you're like, oh, Nick Mangold, Orlando Franklin. These guys are available. Who's gonna sign them? And then maybe a team eventually signs them. In terms of the Bengals, I don't think they're gonna be looking. I mean, I'm sure they'll have like a list of guys who they'll consider if other teams cut, but I mean, you look at what they've done this offseason, I would guess there probably aren't going to be any late signings that they use to replace. And even you just look at the roster. I mean, the Bengals clearly value, whether you think it's a weakness or a strength or you're neutral about it, the Bengals very much value players' experience in their system. They clearly, it's just guys always end up back in Cincinnati. Guys like Trey Hopkins who stick around often, get snaps and stuff like that over the guys who are inexperienced, just because the team is more familiar with these players and more comfortable with the fact that they know these guys know the system and the playbook and all that stuff. So in terms of asking whether or not O-line's a position where a guy's just going to be able to hop in, I would very highly doubt that. The Bengals really don't like to just sub in guys off the cuff. And any possible free agents they could or should be looking at. I mean, the obvious name is Nick Mangold. Do I think they're going to or should sign him? No. I mean, they have three centers on the roster. What are you going to do? I like Orlando Franklin just because he was on the Chargers, but he is not a guy that they should be signing. There really aren't any names on the market I would really want to sign. It would be a lot more, I would say, trade interest the Bengals would or should have, as opposed to signing, just because of the fact that they have so many players on their roster that there will be guys who they could potentially try to cut or place on the practice squad who end up for other teams, whereas most other teams in the league don't see that happen to their players necessarily. I mean, you saw Matt Langle last year go to the Patriots, who was the last player anyone thought would be picked up by an active roster, but then he goes to New England and ends up winning a ring, so good for him. But I think at the end of the day, you look at the Bengals roster and they're solid, and the team in itself values like experience and continuity. So it's hard to imagine a guy gets signed late and or comes in and just immediately starts playing.
If Jason Von Stein in the live YouTube chat had his way, the Bengals would sign Manu Ginobili as a free agent this year to play what position? I'm not sure.
I don't know, maybe kicker.
Yeah, maybe.
He's Argentinian.
Yeah, there you go. But that being said, there's also Tom Brooks in the YouTube chat said, "How about another Dunlap?" And of course, who he's referencing, and a guy you have to be familiar with, Connor, living in San Diego,
the
King Dunlap. Yes. And I believe he's still a free agent. He is 31 years old.
Yeah.
He's been in
6'9". He's crazy. He's so big. And his
gigantic.
name is King. He's like the most imposing person I've ever seen in my life.
Gigantic. I mean, he's a mammoth.
There was a viral picture of him. Anyone who's watching or listening, look this up. King Dunlap next to Danny Woodhead. It's one of my favorite pictures I've ever seen in my life. It's just this 6'9" guy standing next to Danny Woodhead, and it just makes Danny Woodhead look so small.
Yeah, but he is 31. He's had some injury issues. There's Orlando Franklin, who you mentioned, and I believe there was an analysis of the Bengals off season. I think it was maybe ESPN or NFL.com. I can't remember who it was, but they gave the Bengals basically a C+ in terms of what they've done in free agency and the draft. And they said the move they need to make is Orlando Franklin, who is a talented guy and is a versatile guy, and a guard. And I think even though the Bengals probably think they have some form of, a Band-Aid in Andre Smith at the guard position, since Kevin Zeitler left in free agency. I mentioned it earlier in the program. It's a guy who's been injured, and it's a guy that, you want to count on this year, but him playing 16 games, 17 if you make the playoffs, that's been kind of rare in Andre Smith's history. So I do think you need to have some sort of contingency plan if you're the Bengals, and there are a lot of other guys. Brandon Fusco, I believe, is still available. Looks like Sebastian Vollmer is still available. If the list I'm looking at is up to date, King Dunlap, as I mentioned, Ryan Clady, but these are all guys that are older, have injury issues, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, most of those guys have injuries. Vollmer retired. But I know, as specifically to Orlando and King, both of those guys have been banged up and have been pretty inconsistent. That being said, I think they'd be interesting backup options, but knowing the Bengals and the way they orchestrate their cap, it wouldn't really make sense, because these guys would probably not command more money than like a young backup would, or an Eric Winston who's been with the team for so long and just takes kind of the minimum salary.
Right, and it's it unfortunately, I hate to say it, it's probably going to be either an unexpected cut or an injury to someone valuable that's going to prompt the team to make one of these types of moves. We've talked about how they're going to manage the roster this year. We'll talk more about that, obviously, as the summer months go on. But very interesting situations at running back, quarterback, wide receiver, defensive tackle, even corner. There's a lot of different safety. There's a lot of different position groups that are pretty crowded, have a lot of good guys. So they'll need to get creative. They'll need to get guys that can play multiple positions, and maybe they can find an offensive lineman who can play multiple positions. But kind of to tie a bow on John's email question, I think the team, and they're telling us this, whether it's verbally or what they're showing on the field, they are prepared to live and die by their top two selections in the 2015 draft, who are Cedric Ogbuehi and Jake Fisher. They are prepared. They drafted those guys because Andrew Whitworth was getting older, Andre Smith was getting older and approaching free agency. They drafted those guys specifically to be the next bookend tackles, whether it was Ogbuehi on the left or Fisher on the left or what have you. But they drafted those guys to be bookend tackles to replace Whitworth and Andre Smith. So far, it has not worked out well. Now they're starting. They're in their third years, and hopefully things will. If they pan out, this line could be great again because they're two high picks. You've got Andre Smith that could potentially be a Bobby Williams type of guy inside. And then Clint Bowling, if he comes back as healthy, he's a solid guard. Bodine has his issues, but if they pan out, this could be a pretty good offensive line. If they don't, I kind of chuckle, but I kind of worry for Andy Dalton's health this year because last year, from what we saw from Cedric Ogbuehi on the right side, was disastrous to be kind about it. There are a couple of other questions in the YouTube chat. Connor, I'm going to try and get to them. I'm scrolling through them. Tom Brooks asks, who's going to be the backup, since we're talking about offensive linemen, who's going to be the backup left tackle this offseason? Who do you think?
Good question. I think one of the most interesting guys on the roster right now is Eric Winston, just because he always manages to kind of stick on the roster on the back end. But you look at the Bengals offensive line, and like we've been saying, there's three guys who are probably going to be on the roster at center. You have at guard Clint Bowling, Trey Hopkins, Christian Westerman, Andre Smith. That's four. You could potentially add Alex Redmond, who'd be a fifth. You have the two tackles in Jake Fisher and Cedric Ogbuehi. So that's already, you're at like either 7 or 8 players on the offensive line. So they could, in theory, not even have Eric. You could, in theory, not keep Eric Winston and then make potentially an Andre Smith or someone your backup tackle. That being said, it's hard to imagine anyone other than Eric Winston being that guy. I don't even know who Landon Leckler is, but apparently he's a potential backup left tackle. I don't know. Like you said, I think the Bengals really like to have versatility on their offensive line. So maybe it's a Christian Westerman or a Trey Hopkins, Trey Hopkins could, I guess, be an option as well. But I don't know. I think that it's probably going to be, it's the tackles are going to be, on paper, Jake Fisher, Cedric Ogbuehi, and Eric Winston.
And that's how they've designed it. And like it or not, that's probably where one of the position groups the Bengals will go light, because they have so many guys that can play multiple positions. I believe Jake Fisher was a guard and a tackle at Oregon. Cedric Ogbuehi played all over the line at Texas A&M. They feel that they've got versatile guys on this line, so that may be able to shave a roster spot or two at some of the aforementioned crowded position groups that I talked about. So I think it's interesting. It also, if it plays into the last question, if some of these guys aren't performing well in preseason or what have you, they may go scouring for somebody that has guard tackle flexibility. Eric Winston, he's not going to light the world on fire. He had a couple of nice years throughout his career. Great locker room guy. Really kind of a play in a pinch type of guy at this point. But they might go searching for another guy like him around final cuts. And if they see whether it's an upgrade to Winston or, we get rid of a guy that many of us fans do not expect them to get rid of, then I think they might add, another guy that way. But for now, the tackle pool on this team is a little thin in terms of actual offensive tackles. And for now, it looks like Fisher, Ogbuehi, and Winston are kind of the locks. Maybe they keep one more or a guy that has guard tackle flexibility going forward. We're going to get out of here soon. I believe there was one more I wanted to talk about, and it was from Royal Flush 513. I have not heard too much about this, but it is an important question. What are the early reviews of the kicking game? As we saw last year, the kicking game can cost us 3 or 4 games, which is 3 or 4 games too many, obviously. That was really fun to talk about last season when we kept Mike Nugent was a weekly topic, if you remember, Connor. I haven't heard too much on the kicking game, but I guess, do you have any overall thoughts in terms of if you've heard anything, and or if you still expect Jake Elliott to be the guy this year, even this early in the offseason?
I mean, you expect them to win the competition, no doubt, but there's going to be a competition. I mean, the Bengals aren't a team that necessarily just gives slots to guys, and I don't know, maybe they will because they picked Jake Elliott in the 5th round. But if there's any year where they really could let a mid-round pick walk, it's definitely the year where they pick a kicker in the 5th round and picked like 4 guys after him or something like that. So, you hope he's a guy that, because like he had, he's the 5th round kicker. He had the good numbers. He even wore Tiger stripes on his helmet in college at one point for the Memphis Tigers. So, I mean, he had a cool helmet. Go look at his chrome helmet. It was kind of cool. Wish the Bengals would do that.
Eerily similar, right? Eerily similar.
I wish the Bengals would wear that helmet. But he had the numbers. He had, I mean, there's not really much you can say. I don't know. There's no like reports like the Buccaneers where you have Roberto Aguayo missing those like kicks inside the 8-yard wide field goal posts and stuff like that. You've heard they haven't been kicking a lot and whatever. I mean, I don't really feel one way or another about that. I'm sure that the team has its reasoning for whatever it does. But yeah, I think with Jake Elliott, I mean, it goes with every position. You hope the best guy wins. You hope every guy on the roster succeeds in whatever way he can. I mean, there's going to be fans who have their gripes with certain players, whether it's Adam Jones, Russell Bodine, Jeremy Hill, guys who the fans have just kind of soured on for various reasons. But for me, I'm always just a big proponent of just root for everyone to do their best. And that sounds really cliche, sounds really like rah-rah, like who cares really at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, as information continues to come out of training camp and all that stuff, I'm sure we'll have more information on that subject.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. Unfortunately, in OTAs, I just don't think that the kicking game is something that's under the microscope, even though it should be for the Bengals. It should be based on last season and based on the listener question there. It cost them games, and you don't want to point in a team sport. You don't want to point the finger at one guy, but when you lose by 3-4 points, you tie a game, and there's missed field goals, mixed extra points, it's hard not to. The team, to their credit, addressed it this offseason. They re-signed Randy Bullock, whatever you think of him, and then they drafted Jake Elliott in the 5th round there, whatever you think of him. But you got to give the team credit. They addressed a need that wasn't, as you go through, you look at offensive line, you talk about certain positions. Obviously, special teams kind of falls down the pecking order, but they addressed it, and they're going to have some form of a competition. It's going to be interesting to see, what plays out there. My guess is you don't spend a pick on a kicker if you don't envision him, even if it's a 5th round pick, you don't spend one on a kicker if you don't envision him making some form of an immediate impact. Unfortunately for this question, I think it's going to take what we see in preseason, what we see in the early parts of the regular season to really gauge how the kicking game is doing. And while it's also a scary prospect, one of the things that might play into the favor, not of the kicking game, but of the Bengals offense, if they decide to go for 2 a little more often this year, they have a whole plethora of weapons that they could use to do so. 3 effective running backs in terms of Jeremy Hill, Giovanni Bernard, and Joe Mixon. They added John Ross, Josh Malone. So if they want to take a little more heat off of the kicking game than they did last year, maybe not play it so conservative, and they want to go for 2 because of the new rule changes when they moved back the extra point attempts. They have weapons to do that. They can spread it out. They can run the ball. They can do a lot of things to go for 2 points. Maybe that's part of the plan this year. We'll see. But unfortunately, it's going to take preseason games and regular season games to really sort it out. Depending on how most people don't care about preseason games in terms of results, you might happen to see some losses by the Bengals in the preseason that, they could win if they went for 2 or whatever, but this is a position that they need to sort out. So instead of going for 2 in the preseason and trying to win a game or tie a game or whatever, they may just kick extra points. They may kick field goals when you're like, oh, go for it on 4th down, because they want to see what they have in their field goal kickers this year. And, I don't really care. It always bums me out when the Bengals lose, but when you kind of look at it that way and you kind of see this is really a roster examination again this preseason, and this is one of the positions that's under high examination. I think it makes sense from that standpoint. Connor, I think we're going to get out of here, and I know you've got some big plans. I don't know. We'll see. You're a more popular guy than I am these days.
I'm moving. I guess that's something. Now, unfortunately.
Those are plans, buddy. Those are plans. Those are not plans that I envy, but those are plans.
Nope.
So last week, unfortunately, you couldn't join us, but last week, Scott Schultz and I, the 3 of us always kind of say, hey, final thoughts, and we kind of whatever. Last week, and this was kind of Scott's idea, he wanted to talk about some movies. So we talked about movies and TV shows that we felt our listeners should be paying attention to. I kind of want to continue that since we're not in the midst of the NFL season. Do you have any movies, Netflix, new or old? We either say, hey, rewatch this, watch this new show, whatever the case may be, whether it's on Netflix or Hulu or cable TV, a movie saw in the theater. Do you have anything that you've seen that you're saying, hey, listeners, you got to go check this out?
I think right now was a perfect time for the new House of Cards season to get released. If anyone's a fan of that, super fun show. I already watched like 4 or 5 episodes in the past couple of days, or no, just yesterday. Oh gosh, man! Whenever a new Netflix season comes out of a show I always watch, I just binge it. But love House of Cards. I'm a big fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, The Office for all those people who like comedies, and movies. All go one on Netflix. Classic Happy Gilmore. So there's my choices.
Oh man, that's a goodie. That's a good one. Last week, unfortunately, I don't want to like project my personal preferences or whatever leanings on the air, but I'm a relatively conservative guy. I do like my edgier shows and all of that stuff. And last week, I recommended Twin Peaks, which was a new Showtime reboot of a 25-year-old. I don't know if you want to call it soap opera, drama, thriller. It's a very weird show. It's not for everybody. I'll reiterate that. This week, there's a new one, and I got to credit one of my friends, Ryan, who told me about this show. It's called The Keepers, and it's a documentary on Netflix. Again, not for the faint of heart. There's some really disturbing content in it, but essentially it's about some if you watch Making a Murderer, if you watched The Jinx with Robert Durst, anything like that, where it's a documentary talking about some injustices and all of that. This one centers around the Catholic Church and a high school in Baltimore. It's very interesting. There is some uncomfortable content, so I want to preface that, but still very interesting, very, very worth watching. And it's only 7 episodes. They're about an hour each, so it's not, a big thing. So as our final thought, these are the shows and movies that we think you should be watching before preseason. Get your binge watching in now before the football season, because otherwise,
for sure.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, it's Sunday all day football, Monday night, Thursday, sometimes it's Saturday. I mean, there's football all the time, so you got to get this stuff in before football season starts. So check out what we're talking about and check out this program. You can check us out on iTunes, on Cincy Jungle, on SoundCloud, on YouTube. Subscribe to those channels. Subscribe to all of our content. We appreciate those who have already done so. You can get in touch with the program on Twitter at Bengals OBI. You can get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Connor, your Twitter handle again is Connor YB, is that right? At Connor YB?
It's YB Connor. And for those who don't know how to spell my name, it's CONNOR, because I know it's a hard name for people to spell.
I just switched it. That's all I did.
It's all good.
I'm at CJ Anthony CUI aside from that. But you can follow all of the content we release at Bengals OBI on Twitter. Get in touch with us, download us, watch us live every week on YouTube and on Cincy Jungle. If you're unable to catch us live, you can catch all of our stuff on SoundCloud, YouTube, Cincy Jungle, that sort of thing. Thank you so much for tuning in live. Thank you so much for your live questions, either in the chat room, via email, all that stuff. We thank you so much. We love doing the listener question segment. It's a big part of our show, and we appreciate all of you who tune in, both brand new listeners and ones who have joined us from day one. We appreciate it. Please, we hope you continue to join us either live or otherwise. For Connor Howe, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider. Again, hope you all had a safe Memorial Day. Thank you to the veterans, past, present, and future, who have served this country. Once again, we appreciate your service. Thanks. We'll see you next episode.